Hello and good evening. Welcome. I am George Mount, Artistic Director of Seattle Shakespeare Company, and it is a pleasure to have you all participating in our discussion on bilingual Shakespeare. First off, Seattle Shakespeare Company acknowledges that we gather on lands taken from the Duwamish, Stillaguamish, Muckleshoot, Suquamish, and all Coast Salish peoples, and we pay respect to them as this region's original storytellers. With this statement, we take a first step toward reconciliation, and we invite you to join us in repairing each of our relationships with this land and its people. You can find out more about Seattle Shakespeare Company's commitment to this on our website at seattleshakespeare.org. Thank you and welcome. Hello. For many years, Seattle Shakespeare Company has been doing and engaging in bilingual adaptations of Shakespeare. It started in our statewide school touring programs, primarily inspired by recognizing that a lot of the communities that we reach, especially east of the mountains, live in bilingual worlds, and we wanted to expand, acknowledge, and invite and recognize that Shakespeare, as a universal storyteller, has universal languages. This year, when pandemic shut us down, we were about to tour our bilingual Hamlet, and we had to adapt. So we did a audio drama adaptation of the bilingual Hamlet, and release that to schools and to the general public. But we also wanted to expand upon and open up even further. We approached our dear friend and collaborator playwright Meme Garcia about an original play based on Hamlet called House of Sueños that was adapted into an audio drama. And we are about to, just days away from releasing a filmed in isolation Zoom-style adaptation of Romeo y Julieta, which will be released to schools and to the general public through the course of the spring. So gathered here tonight are some of the creators behind those projects to talk about the experience, the need, the joy, the frustrations, anything the conversation leads in regards to Shakespeare, classical theater, bilingual adaptation, performance, etc. And here is your host, moderator, facilitator, participant for the evening, Arlene Martinez Vasquez.
Hi, thank you, George. My name is Arlene Martinez Vasquez, and I am really proud and pleased to have been invited to have this conversation with my colleagues and friends and some of my favorite people in Seattle. And we have formatted this as a roundtable discussion. So we will each be asking a question from one of the participants, just to make sure we're all passionate, opinionated people. So this format will give us the opportunity to make sure we each have the opportunity to speak to a specific topic and react to each other as we see fit and we might feel moved. We want to keep each question to the 5 to 7 minute mark, so we can stop around 45 minutes to allow for questions from the audience if you all have any. And if you don't you worry, we will keep talking. We could talk about this for 3 days straight. So we'll start by introducing ourselves with our names, our pronouns, bilingual adaptations we've worked on, and we'll include a sentence or two about what identities we hold that bring us to this conversation. And given I'm already speaking, I might as well go. My name is Arlene Martinez Vasquez. My pronouns are she, her. I have worked on bilingual adaptations of a Venezuelan play called Passport by Gustavo Ott, which presented at ACT back in 2011, and a bilingual adaptation of David Oburn's Proof with Maria Campoy, which toured Washington State in 2017 and 2018, and Franco as well was part of that team. And I am Puerto Rican, born and raised. I did not learn English until I was 21 years old. And most of my studies, well, all of my studies, BA and MFA, have been outside of the United States. So I do come with a different background to this conversation than what the American theater is. I'm still learning what the American theater is. And I will go ahead and pass it to Ana Maria.
Thank you, Arlene. My name is Maria Campoy. My pronouns are she, her. I identify as mixed race, Chicana, first generation Mexican American. I learned Spanish and English around the same time in my household until about the age of 3. I spoke both languages like mixed up in a sentence at the same time. I started working on bilingual adaptations first as an actor, and then it slowly evolved as an adapter. First as an actor at Book It Repertory Theater and some of their touring productions. And then with Seattle Shakes, I worked on The Taming of the Shrew, Twelfth Night, the Scottish play, Hamlet, and Romeo y Julieta. And then one of my greatest joys was adapting Proof with Arlene Martinez Vasquez and getting Franco to play my sister in that, and getting to tour all over Washington State. That was wonderful for the 2 summers of 2017 and 2018. And then for the last 2 years, well, prior to the pandemic, I was also on tour as Reina in Above, Between, Below through Seattle Children's Theater, and I got to adapt that along with the original playwright Ramon Escalel. I'm going to pass this to Kiki.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kiki Dominguez. My pronouns are they, them. And I want to take a second and say that I am currently in Oakland. So I want to do a land acknowledgement for Oakland, and I am on the Ohlone land. I'm on the Ohlone land in Oakland. And some bilingual adaptations I have been a part of. I have done a touring show with Book It, we did a telling of the story of Celia Cruz. I did a stage reading of a play written by another panelist we have here, Franco, who you'll meet a little bit later. And I did the Scottish play with Seattle Shakespeare as well as Hamlet. And we had one run before we had to shut down for COVID policies and all that. And I'm also worked on the curriculum for Romeo y Julieta and for the virtual learning, for the virtual adaptation. Some things that I identify as is I am multiracial. So my family is Belizean as well as French Creole. So there's a lot of different language that I get to play with when I'm not speaking English necessarily. And we didn't speak a lot of Spanish growing up. I had some Spanish classes, but I was raised in multi homes. So in my mom's house, we did not really speak a lot of English. And then we learned more about our Spanish heritage as I got older. So that is where I come in with all of these conversations. And with that, I'll pass it on over to Franco.
Hey everyone, my name is Sofia Franco. I go by Sofia Franco. My pronouns are they, them. It's really nice to see all of you and hang out and talk about this together. To not be overly redundant, I have worked with Ana Maria on all of the shows in the Seattle Shakespeare bilingual adaptations thus far. I've had the privilege of working as an actor, a text coach, and this year as a director, which is really awesome. I also adapted a bilingual book called The Upside Down Boy for Book It's educational tour. I write bilingual plays because that's how my feelings work. So when I write, my plays are bilingual. And I worked on the bilingual audio play House of Sueños written by Meme Garcia, which was released by Seattle Shakes in March. So yeah, that's some of the work that I've done. I am a white passing Peruvian American first generation person here. My family did speak Spanish in the house, but my parents would speak to me in Spanish. I did grow up speaking Spanish, but as I became a teenager and stuff, I definitely reply in English. And it wasn't until I moved to Seattle away from my home that and finding other Latinos in the community that I really prioritized solidifying my grasp on the language. So I'm not perfectly fluent, but every production that we do brings me closer. And with that, I'm going to pass it to you, Meme.
Hola, hola. My name is Meme Garcia. I go by they, them, or les, o ellas, si hablas español. Franco and I are currently on the land of the Shasta and Takelma in Southern Oregon, in Ashland, Oregon. I am a playwright, an actor, a poet occasionally when people pay me enough money. I am originally from El Salvador, San Salvador, and my family is from Tecapán, Usulután. I am also from the United States. My mother is una gringa, and so I am also a white passing Latinx person. I grew up speaking English and Spanish, both in the household. I mean, I moved to the States when I would have been 3, 4. I don't actually know. My mom would know. Obviously, she would know she moved me here. And most half of my family lives in El Salvador, and the other half lives here in the United States. So I was raised biculturally. And I am, first, before I am a Latino, I am a Salvadoran American. I don't actually really identify with the word Latino. I find it to be reductive because when you're in Latino America, everybody is a Latino. So it's like the equivalent of being American. You know what I mean? I'm like, you point to someone, they're Latino. So I find that word to be rather complicated and actually like a way for the census to whitewash hundreds of thousands of people and kind of separate us from our indigenous roots and our for those who have them, our Afro-Latino roots. So anyways, that's maybe TMI, but that's who I am. I worked on Romeo y Julieta. I'm playing Romeo in Franco and Ana Maria's and Seattle Shakespeare's production of Romeo and Juliet. I wrote House of Sueños, which just premiered. And I have done just a bunch of different stuff, not so much bilingual work until just recently. I did La Comedia of Errors at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, where I've been for the last 2.5 years. And yeah, that is a little bit about who I am in a nutshell. Passing it over to Kiki.
Thank you. Okay, this is great because as you can see, we have playwrights, adapters, directors, actors, the whole shebang. So I wanted to start us off by talking about what responses that we have received as artists from audience members in the bilingual plays that fuel our work. So I do want to open that up to like if you are acting in a play, or also, like I said, like you had responses as adapters or also writers. And I will start because we had a lot of fun doing the tour and getting to kind of hear what the students had to say, because this was traveling to middle schools and high schools. And sometimes it was real early in the morning. So you would have a chance to kind of like shuffle everybody in and have them sit down and kind of get acquainted with the language all around, and whether that is the Shakespeare as well as the Spanish. So hearing the audience's responses, there were a lot of excitement for kind of picking up on the joke and knowing what was going on. So we would have kids who would be understanding one part of the show and then understanding another part of the show, just like through the language itself, and then clicking that all together. So really, I would say that the biggest responses we received was just like joy from having an opportunity to hear these words and hear this heightened text in another way that seems more accessible to some of these students. So with that, I'll open it up. What about everyone else? What do y'all think?
Awesome. Great question. Thank you, Kiki. I was also on the tour, and when I was on the tour, I mean, it was like always rad seeing kids respond, you know, BIPOC kids, Latin kids, all kinds of kids actually being like, oh my gosh, I understood so much more than I thought I would, right? Like, that's amazing. They do that with the Shakespeare and with the Spanish. But one particular interaction that I had with an audience member that always leaps out at me when I remember that time was actually a Facebook message that I got from this man who came to see a show it was a public show at a theater in the eastern side of the state. And he was a migrant farm worker, and he and his colleagues, like 5 of them, came to see the show. I believe it was bilingual 12th night that year. And he wrote this extremely beautiful letter to me about how he was so grateful to see Spanish being spoken on stage, and how he never thought that he would see Spanish and Shakespeare mixed together. He never thought he'd be able to understand Shakespeare, and to have his language and his culture elevated in that way was really moving for him and his friends. And it was really quite beautiful. So that to me like really stands out.
That's so beautiful. I think mine is, I have some friends who live in the United Kingdom, and I sent them my play House of Sueños to listen to, and they wrote back and they were absolutely fundamentally shocked. They were like aghast. Not, I would say aghast in a bad way, but they were like, they described it as being struck by lightning, which I just think is like so lovely, you know? And I wrote back and I was like, well, how great for you to feel so uncomfortable. I can't imagine what that's like. So I, you know, obviously I have a million of really positive, incredible responses, but I just remember being like, I love it when work shocks like when I'm shocked by a piece of art, you know, because it's so rare that I feel like I'm actually surprised these days. So I particularly enjoyed that.
I think for me, there's a lot of stories I can pull from, but one of my favorites I would have to say is when we did our second public reading of Proof. Arlene is one of my favorite ones. We did it was our second public reading, and a bunch of students from the UW came down from the Latinx, the club of like Latinx STEM students came down, and they were so excited because they were like, there's never a story of Latinx people in STEM. Never. It doesn't, and we exist. We've been here, and there's never a story about us. And to see this play adapted with that lens was really exciting. And like, I just remember that talk back mainly was people sharing their personal stories and being like, that moment reminded me think of my tia Tati and and like everyone just having a story to share. And then I remember it was like, we looked at the time and it had been an hour of the talk back after a 2-hour reading. And then so at that point we were like, it's been 3 hours. We have to kick you out of the theater. And then people like stayed in the parking lot, like talking for another half hour afterwards. And it was freezing in January in Seattle. And so to me, like the fact that like that excitement of like, especially people who like some of the young people there were like, I don't really see theater, but like this caught my eye because I heard it was bilingual and about math. And like, and so I came, and like, that was really exciting, was like, oh, like you found your way in and you saw yourself and now you're excited and now you don't want to leave the theater. And like giving people that feeling of like, I don't want to leave the space that I just entered. It's such a cool feeling. And like, there's a million moments that I can say that like having what it's done for me of seeing bilingual theater and like how it's changed my life. And as someone who like, I see myself as someone who lives in duality and loves duality in my expression and in how I exist and portray myself in the world. And so what I love about bilingual theater in general is that it gives space for like the whole expression of myself. And that's why I feel like a lot of times their response is so big, even from non-Spanish speakers, even from non-Latinx people, is because they get to see people living in a full like rainbow. I know it's not your favorite word, meme of Latinidad, and just like living in that like the full like seeing all of it and just knowing that like we're not a monolith, like we're not one definition. You know, and just on this call alone, we have Puerto Rico, Peru, Belize, El Salvador, and Mexico. So like it just on that alone, there's like different regions and dialects and legends and stories and like that's to me what I get excited about with bilingual theater is that it's automatically a yes and to the audience and a yes and to the artist. And so that's what I love about it.
Yeah, I think I completely agree. And I think that for me, my favorite experience, it's actually kind of like one of the things that I consider one of the highlights of my career, which was doing the bilingual stage reading of Passport at Burien Actors Theater back in 2011. And it was a play it was an absurdist play written completely in English and completely in Spanish and then translated completely in English about people who couldn't understand each other. And we mixed the two translations to make that both literal and political. And there's a moment where the main character is taken prisoner and being blindfolded and gagged. And at the end, we had a talk back, and this woman in Spanish, she's like crying her eyes out. And she goes like, when I saw this character being blindfolded and gagged, I've been feeling like that for years. And I saw that on stage and I thought, finally, somebody knows that I'm here. And that gives me goosebumps. It's been like 2011, 10 years ago. Like, and I still have like, yes, you know, like just to let people know that they're seen, you know, and that there's people out there who share their experiences is what it's all about. So yeah, that's mine. For our next question, we have Meme.
Really quick before I ask that question, which is, I totally saw Passport when I was like 19 years old as a freshman in undergrad. I totally saw it. Side note, total side note.
The bilingual version? Really? You serious?
Yes, because I was going to Seattle. I totally saw it. I remember I must have gone with my like acting class, but I totally saw it. Anyways, and I remember loving it. So there you go.
Muy, muy pequeño el mundo.
Pequeño. Okay, Franco, my question is for you.
Yeah.
My question is, if you like, what is a dream show and what is its dream concept that you have for a bilingual production of a play?
That's hard. I feel like I have a new dream show all the time too. And also I like literally just directed one of my bilingual dream shows, Romeo and Juliet. So I feel like I'm like, oh, what's next in the Rolodex?
Was that your dream, Romeo?
Shut up. So for me, I guess thinking about that, I'm like, I'm really interested in, right, I think kind of that personal exploration we all as BIPOC artists and specifically as like bilingual artists do with it is like, I'm really interested in making a play in Peru and like going and interviewing family members and feeling, right, like exploring the tension of, you know, this ni de aquí ni de allá, you know, like that I've felt my whole life as a first generation American, and going and like exploring like what would my life have been like if I had grown up amongst all of my cousins? What would my life have been like if I had been raised by my grandparents, you know? And so really exploring that. And like my mom's family has been in Peru for 7 generations. And before that, you know, it's like we're learning. She shares little jewels every now and then. She's like, oh yeah, we also lived in Panama. We lived in Cuba. We lived in Mexico before that. And so for me, like, I'm really interested in going and, you know, writing a play that explores all of those different stories and, you know, and to work with Peruvian actors, to work, you know, in South America and to explore, right, myself and this other culture that is also not mine at the same time, you know? So I'm really interested in that. Yeah.
And do you think that phrase, ni de aquí, ni de allá, is like a main theme in your work?
I don't know if it's necessarily a main theme in my work, but it's definitely a main theme in my life. You know, like it's interesting, you know, there's like all of these contradictions in my identity, right? It's like, especially coming from Southern California and moving to Seattle, right? Like in Southern California, it's like people like always thought I was Mexican if they thought that I was, you know, not white, but I am super white passing. And in Seattle, people have told me like, oh my gosh, you're so exotic, right? And I'm like, look at me, am I exotic? I've got curly hair and thick eyebrows. Like, that's pretty much it. You know, but like finding that tension of like identity and where I am being part of my identity and also not feeling fully one thing and the other. You know, your question also made me think about how like, you know, my gut reaction is I'm like, I fucking love the Greeks, right? But I'm like, why don't we have that? Why don't I have that relationship with Peruvian myths? You know, I don't have that lineage. It's not like, oh yeah, there's this beautiful Peruvian myth I can adapt into a play. You know, I'm like, oh, I'm thinking about Medea and Clytemnestra, who are like fucking dope. But I'm like, I want to find that in my own culture and in myself, rather than just, you know, repeating. I mean, great classics, but repeating that. So yeah, ni de aquí, ni de allá. And then also, right, we layer on not a man, not a woman, non-binary, trans. What does that mean in Spanish, right? How do I even say your name or whatever? Excuse me for swearing also, forgive me. I didn't mean to offend any audience members with my swearing. But I feel passionately about these questions. So yeah, it is, right, an exploration. It's like I know myself through my interactions with others, and part of the way I explore the world is through my art, making art with other people. Yeah.
That was awesome. I'd see your TED Talk. I'm gonna pass it over to Ana Maria.
Thank you, Meme. Arlene. So I love the fact that like you have all this knowledge and experience of like theater in Latin America. So it would behoove us it'd be dumb of us not to take advantage of the fact that you're in the space. So like plays, theater artists, playwrights, or practices that you wish were done more in the United States.
Thank you. Yes, it's so weird because I was doing exclusively Latin American theater until I was 26. And then all of a sudden, nobody knows what I'm talking about half the times. So things that I love about Latin American theater, I'm just going to start there. My experience of Latin American theater in Puerto Rico, which is probably very different from what happens in Peru and El Salvador and other places, is I love the use and play with language in Latin American theater, which I have specialized in translating Latin American plays to English, and it's one of the hardest things to convey. There is a specific musicality. There's a lot of personification when you're speaking Spanish, and you can say more absurdist things, which kind of also fits into magical realism, but not everything that happens in Latin America is magical realism, which is one of my pet peeves. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Not everything that's not a couch play is magical realism. And also, I love Latin American theater because it tends to be very politically engaged, and it's a theater tradition that comes from the body first. Even though it has this beautiful play with language, it comes from the body first. It happens in the squares, it happens with masks, it happens with puppets, it happens with live music, and it's really an all-encompassing experience. The first times that I watch plays where people are having 20-minute conversations sitting in a couch drinking tea, I was like, what on earth is going on? That's just not the theater tradition that I personally come from. I have learned to appreciate it for other reasons, but it's just different. So yeah, and I think, through my translating work, I have kind of brought to Seattle the place that I wish people knew. Luis Rafael Sanchez is a Puerto Rican playwright who is one of my favorite writers of all time. And he has a beautiful adaptation of Antigone, which I directed back in 2015. And he has beautiful poetic plays about this. I don't know how you say quintuples in English. Does anybody know how to say quintuples in Spanish? It's like 5 who are
quintuplets.
Those ones, yes, quintuplets, who are all circus performers, and they have these twisted monologues about what it means to be a circus performer. They're insane. And there's a beautiful show called Stories to be Told by Osvaldo Dragón, who I think is Argentinian. And they're all these absurdist histories about how the plague propagated itself through all of Latin America because of the actions of one single individual. And it's super funny and clown-based. So anyway, yes, there's a lot of beautiful, beautiful plays. I really miss the imagination. I really miss the physicality and the integration of all arts. And I really miss the use of language, my beautiful Spanish language, which I miss. And I would love, given the opportunity that I'm already talking, to give Meme kind of my heady, complicated question when I think about bilingual theater. And I think, yes, I'm going to stop talking. The question is, what does it mean to create bilingual theater in the United States? And how does this relate to imperialism, colonialism, and white supremacy, Meme? Take us to your TED Talk.
Dale. A veces voy a hablar en español porque esto sí es una conversación bilingüe y no estamos hablando mucho en español. Eso está bien, pero a veces voy a hablar un poco en español. Y a veces voy a hablar en inglés. Los dos.
Habla en Spanglish como te salga.
Yeah, Spanglish. Voy a hablar en Spanglish. Bueno, para mí es a little complicated. Es una pregunta complicada, ¿no? Porque to perform in Spanish, for Franco, for Arlene, for Ana Maria, for Kiki, for me, for all of us to perform in Espanol is to inherently perform in the language of the colonizer. As many people know, Latino America was colonized by the Spanish for hundreds of years. And from that occurred mass genocide. We're talking, and when I say mass, we're talking like at least 70 million indigenous peoples, at least. And we're talking about like brutal colonization. And so for us to have this identity, this relationship to the language of Spanish, es como pica, no? Pica, it itches us all the time because we have no idea. Many of us don't have a good grasp about what our indigenous languages are. So I come from El Salvador, and El Salvador, it is the Lencan and the Nahua people, and we speak Nahuatl, no? Pero less than 1% of the population actually speaks that language. In Guatemala, por ejemplo, 36% of the population is indigenous. They speak over 38 different languages other than Spanish, right? But these two countries, side by side, the reason why they're so different is because El Salvador, throughout essentially like by when the Spaniards landed to today, massively killed indigenous populations because a lot of them are related to uprisings and revolutions, and the United States thought they were dangerous, right? And so for us to perform bilingual work is complicated on a level that I think sometimes primarily white institutions don't recognize. And I think in terms of how it relates to colonialism and imperialism is right there, no? Porque el español is not our language. But so many of us identify it with being a part of our culture, no? I know that when I grew up, I was always like very como bien, me dio como un montón de nervios porque pensé que no podría hablar español good, right? I was like, oh, I don't speak Spanish, like I'm not Latino, or oh, I have to speak Spanish because then people will know I'm Latino. And at the end of the day, I'm like, well, I'm Latino. There's no, I'm Salvadoran. That's like who my identity is. And like other people can't necessarily take that away. And, like all these things have kind of happened in my life that have been, good or bad, but they have been because I'm Salvadoran. So yeah, I don't know if I'm actually answering your question, but I feel like there's sometimes a little bit of a lack of knowledge when theater companies are like, let's do a bilingual show. And I'm like, well, first and foremost, we have to talk about the colonialization that's at the heart of the Spanish language. And that has like forced itself onto all of us without our permission. And that it is upheld as a bastion of culture, as a bastion of identity. And it makes me think a lot like, in France, they have an institute that like protects the French language, which is fascinating to me, right?
And in Spanish, la Real Academia de la Lengua Española.
Yeah, there are these institutes that protect language from slang, but so much of the time, slang is actually in Espanol, is based in indigenous languages.
Yes.
So, por ejemplo, like in Spanish, like we don't say dog, we say chucho, right? I don't say sucio, I say chuco. I can't even say this word because it's a bad word, but for straw, I say pajilla, right? Because the other word is a very bad word in Espanol. So like, and all of these come from indigenous words, an indigenous language that we don't know. So we create this kind of cobbled together bastard Spanish.
There's a lot of Spanish slang that I grew up hearing that it wasn't until I was an older teen that I realized that it came from into the indigenous people of Sonora, the Yaqui, and like their language that I grew up hearing. And which like when I realized that, I was like, oh, that explains why like my cousins from DF and my cousins from Mexico City like would look at me sometimes like, what is she saying? Like when I would be throwing in this slang, because it wasn't slang that they were familiar with because it was regional. Another thing that I think is really political, Meme, if I could add on to your point about doing bilingual productions at PWIs, is language acquisition. Language acquisition in this country, when it comes to anyone who speaks a secondary language, has a history of a lot of pain. It wasn't until like as an elder millennial, like in my generation, that they finally started, like more public schools in America in the United States specifically, started having dual language programs. Like in the times of my own father, he learned Spanish because he grew up in Mexico, but his brother grew up in the US. And during that time, like teachers were still like slapping kids if they spoke Spanish on the playground. And that was only one generation ago. So understanding that like there are young people in this country who are forced, who have to speak Spanish because they are the person filling out the medical forms for their parent. So there is trauma there. And then there are kids whose language has been taken from them, and there is trauma there. And so recognizing that there is a spectrum, and not all, and understanding that actors come in with whatever experiences, and all of it is valid. And I think that is one of the biggest things with companies, to get them to understand that it is all valid. Like, it is all an experience, because it's about what does it mean to be a Latinx person, a Latin person, a Latino in the United States. And that is like what Franco was saying, ni de aquí, ni de allá. There's a really kind of not a really nice nickname in Mexico that they say poche. Like if you're not really of here or from there, it's kind of like the little border. So acknowledging that and creating space for that language and for all the accents and everything is, I think, also one of the things that's really important. And making and acknowledging that just because someone is Latino doesn't necessarily that they're not white or not mixed race or not half white, because there is colonizers, white people from Europe came to Latin America, they're still white, even though they're Latino. And so, yeah, acknowledging all the complexities is one of the things, which is why when I say bilingual theater is yes and, that's one of the things I love about it, is that it does force you to ask these hard questions and have these hard thoughts as an artist and as a person.
Beautiful, beautiful. Okay, I want to ask Kiki a question. So, right, we're talking about art. We're also, right, people who engage, obviously, in the place where, right, how our art is intersecting with the political existence of all of our bodies in this world. But I want to ask you, how do you prioritize your own time and your own healing as you participate in dismantling white supremacy through your art?
Thank you for that question. And I think that it's tough because the answer is in there, and it's that matter of needing to prioritize your own time and your own healing. And this group specifically, we all for the most part know each other really well, and are I can speak to this group about, I know that all of you are such caring individuals who would go above and beyond for anybody in this group. And so really remembering to prioritize your time, say yes to what you can say yes to, but also say no. Say no. Go take a nap. Sometimes you just need a break. And I think this goes back to what we're talking about white supremacy, because capitalism and white supremacy thrive by creating this atmosphere and this culture where productivity determines your value. And so if you're not answering those emails, if you're not getting back, if you're not on that hustle for that audition and that next thing, then you're not prioritizing your time and what you're capable of and what you want to do. And so I think that is a real important thing, that everyone goes back to this idea of self-care and how that is important to make sure that you can keep going and that you can keep filling other people's cup. They talk about if your cup's not full, you can't fill other people's cup. So you could just run yourself ragged with all of these different things you're doing. And if you don't take a break, you might lose yourself, you might burn out, and you won't be able to do all of these things because it might just come off as just overwhelming and a little too much.
How do you take care of yourself? You have a little practice you want to share with us?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay. So I would always recommend yoga in any form. And whether that is I'm gonna look up a quick 2-minute YouTube video on just what to stretch and how to move around. But breathing, for me personally, breathing is a very important key, because sometimes, and I don't know how this manifests for everybody else, but when I get into that headspace of things are overwhelming, or I want to fight the system, or I've encountered this instance of white supremacy of some fashion that I am ready to explode at or shut down on, just taking some deep inhales through my nose and then exhaling out my mouth really helps to just ground myself and come back to the moment of what is happening and trying to identify in myself what I am responding to. but I don't know if you all know that there's an Audre Lorde quote, of course, that is the caring for myself is not self-indulgence, is self-preservation, and that's an act of political warfare. So yeah, I think it goes back to that caring for yourself. And I'm totally going to put everybody on the spot right now. And I'm going to ask, like, what do you all do? Like, please, let's give each other some pointers. What do you do for your self-care? And if you are like, I don't know, like, what do you want to cultivate more of? What do you want to do for your self-care?
I go to therapy. I love it. Therapy's great. I go to therapy, but I also bake and I cook and all those things. But my number one thing is I go to therapy.
Hell yeah. For me, it's so interesting. I feel like when I hear the word self-care, I feel like it's kind of been stolen by capitalistic forces that are like, do you want to relax? Buy this mask. Buy this special rock to rub on your face. Self-care, you know, give us your money for self-care because that's the only way it can be done. So, and I'm a Taurus. I love stuff. I'll just say that. So I really have to resist the urge to feed my inner online shopaholic. So what I've been trying to do is just go outside, especially during this pandemic. I'm like, just take a walk outside, look at a flower, right? Listen to the bees, like, and really appreciate those quiet moments in nature because yeah, it's amazingly rejuvenating for me personally. It's to just remember that I'm a small little part of the world and all my big troubles are just inconsequential in the grand scheme of the universe.
I became a plant person during this pandemic. I have like 80 house plants, including an avocado tree in my kitchen, and that is like taller than my husband. I honestly, like, it's the same, Franco. Like, it's about just getting away from my screen. And sometimes I don't have enough time to go outside and like to go for a walk. Like, I love to take really long walks and like think about it, deep breaths and meditate. And especially if I'm angry, just like walk it off. But plants have been very helpful. And just like also like seeing something that like I put effort into, or like I put care into this and I will see something grow. And like, in a time where the headlines every day are telling us who has died or how many have died, it is really nice to do something where you see life. So that has been a self-care for myself this pandemic.
Absolutamente.
I think that for me, it's about mantras and it's about really treasuring the ownership of my time. And I will own the massive privilege that I have. That means I don't need to work 60 hours a week to pay my bills. So I do get the luxury of saying I'm only going to work this amount of hours. But I think for me, it really is also a part of that like internal decolonization, right? Of like, I'm not my work. I don't need to prove to you, what organization, that I am worthy of this opportunity. I will do an amazing play and I will do it in this amount of time, in these days a week, with these limitations of my time and energy, because otherwise I won't give you the best play that I can give you. This is the way in which I can give you my best work. And just being able to be vocal about those things and really owning these things. And I think the mantras come, as Ana Maria say, when the world is always on fire and it feels like we're constantly trying to stop a freight train that's there to destroy everybody who's not white, cis, and able-bodied and privileged, you know. I think my mantra is like, I'm doing what I can from my circles of influence. And what is my circle of influence? This is what I'm going to do today. And I cannot try to save everybody all the time because that's just not going to happen. So mantras and ownership of my time is where we're at.
Excellent. Amazing. Great. Ana Maria, I wanted to ask you, if you could have audience members have 3 takeaways from this conversation, what would they be?
There would be in a couple different spheres. In the artistic sphere, when it comes to the arts, like I would ask people like, ask your local theater companies for bilingual shows, and not just Spanish. Like, but I want to make one thing clear. Like, for me, when I talk about and I fight for bilingual theater, is because I believe like having all the languages on stage is like whatever shows us more of what is the United States, what is America. And we have all these languages. Seattle Public Schools has 20 languages alone, over a dozen of them from Africa. So like, call your theater companies and be like, I want to see more languages on stage. Oh, you gave me a season of nothing but I'm going to hear nothing but English for a full season. Boring. Give me something more. Like, really push for it. It's call your representatives, tell them to fund the arts, tell them to fund the NDA, tell them, like, in the 1930s, we had the WPA, we had artists going all over the country to support small rural communities, to support large cities, to get messages out about public health, about Social Security in the 30s. If we figured it out then, we can do it now. We just got to be imaginative. So push our government to do that on the federal level. The other thing is to support your local mutual aids. In general, especially in like a lot of mutual aids that I have come across are run or supported by artists in some sort of way. So if you want to support the artists of your community, support local mutual aids, whether they're helping the unhoused or people needing food. A lot of times there is an artist at some point, because artists are like, what we do is in response to society. So often our work is political. Going back to what you said about how Latino theater, Arlene, is like inherently political in Latin America, Chicano theater in the United States specifically got its roots in the migrant workers' struggle in the late 1960s, with Luis Valdez literally doing performing theater on the fields with farm workers. So in honor of that, in honor of the farm workers who have been working in the fields through like snow, wind, rain, and pandemic this year, the Farm Worker Modernization and Dream Act has passed the House, and it is currently on the Senate. And it's giving people who feed us a pathway to citizenship, and also protections and providing PPE and all sorts of things. So calling people on behalf of that and supporting that, if I'm allowed to say that, please do. And so just when you are talking about bilingual theater, a lot of it is, like Meme said, we're trying to dismantle a whole thing here, right? So it's not just about like, I want to see these plays. It's about, I want to see these plays, and what am I doing to support my community directly? And what am I doing to advocate for this community on the federal level? And who is not story not being told that I can demand that they're included, whether it's in the arts, or maybe they're not being told because they're a community that is historically being harmed legally. And how do we help that or fight against that? So just realizing that when we are, and I also say all this because I feel like arts patrons are passionate. I think they're intelligent, and I think they're some of the most socially engaged human beings on the planet. And so I hope that the audience take away those things tonight. So, yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. That is so exciting that there's so much people can do, even just in their communities, to support, right, bilingual artists and artists all over.
I have one thing, which is, I feel like so often we're so comfortable hearing different languages or dialects spoken on stage, but not comfortable hearing them in real life. So my thing is, I'm like, if you are comfortable and you have paid good money to go see a bilingual play, and that's perfectly fine for you, but then when you're on the bus or when you're on the street, you hear other languages being spoken, it's the same language. Isn't that beautiful? I'm like, it's just like, so just kind of taking that same love and that same light that you have when you see Romeo y Julieta, when you listen to House of Sueños, I'm like taking that same love and appreciation of that. And when you like walk on the street or go to the grocery store, or the pharmacy or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
And know that other languages belong in America.
100%. So it is 8:20. If the audience has any questions, this is your chance to ask. And while you make your choices whether you're going to ask any questions or not, I'll go ahead and ask a question to anybody who might want to answer, because this is such a intelligent and talented group of theater leaders right here, which is, how can theaters incorporate more bilingualism in their seasons? And as Ana Maria said, not just Spanish, but other languages. Like, what are the steps that a predominantly white organization could take to incorporate bilingualism in their seasons?
I feel like the first thing is hire bilingual people.
What? Oh my God.
Hire other bilingual people, don't, I think that a trap predominantly white institutions can fall into, even if they're trying to produce bilingual theater, right, is that no one in the production team or the producing team can speak the language. So there's no one there who can be like, this is problematic, or this is stereotypical, we should change this, or like whatever, right? Because that person needs to be there to advocate for the actors who might know this, right? But within the current structure of the theater, right? It's like if an actor's like, I don't want to say these words, right? That's a problem right now in theater. You don't want to say those words, you're a problem, we're not going to hire you again. So to really begin to take that work on of investigating this bilingual play, because just because it's bilingual doesn't mean it's not racist, misogynistic, homophobic, right? Like that exists in all languages. So like really making sure that the production, that the play itself is also, has the values that you want to tell in bilingual theater. Mm-hmm. And that needs to happen from the company with someone who is bilingual on the staff, who is paid to do that work. What a good place to start.
I would also say in every production, have a language coach. Don't assume that the artists in the room are fluent, or like don't have like fears, and like you would have, they're in like OSF has text coaches, like they're like, you have a music director for a musical, so like you have a fight choreographer when there's fights on stage. Like this is another thing, like, and also even for, I know this is one of the biggest things when I started performing bilingually, was like learning how to perform bilingually, because hablo en español como todos los días, pero como hablo así, como con mi boca medio cerrada, es muy diferente cuando estoy actuando en un escenario y tengo que pronunciar todo bonito, o que me entienden o que me oigan hasta
boca cerrada. Bueno.
Just like, what I was saying was like, having the difference between like speaking casually to like my cousins and my sisters and my friends versus like performing on stage. Just like, we like, maybe relax our voices when we're not performing on stage, when we're speaking English. Just that is also why a language coach is also important to have in the room.
Any other pointers for the theaters that are out there taking notes?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Franco and Ana Maria. And I think that just to like, for theaters to remind themselves that there is universality in the specific. So regardless of what bilingual theater you're doing, like people will like, Cambodian rock band blew my effing mind. And I saw my father, I saw my tios, I saw my tias, all my family in it, but I'm not Cambodian. So I'm just like, just to encourage people that it's okay to be specific, that there's not, or to create like specific adaptations of Shakespeare, or that those things are actually important. And then you can have a dialogue. Like House of Sueños is a Central American play. It's not a Chicano play, contrary to popular belief. But it's a Central American play. But I'm like, how incredible that all different types of Latinos, all different types of people from around the globe, literally, people in Sweden connected with it, But I'm like, because it was specific, that's what allowed it to kind of to blossom in a way, for it to bloom.
And to treat that specificity with the same care and love that you give to like the specificity when you do Oscar Wilde, or when you do when people do like when the BBC pulls out like a Downton Abbey like production, the specificity is what makes it beautiful, great to watch. Like there's nothing about Downton Abbey that I'm like, oh, I really want that for me or anything, but the storytelling is great because it's so specific and the actors are great. And so trusting that specificity that artists have to bring, and know that it will appeal. Don't just because it's not a culture you have seen or a language you have seen representative doesn't mean that the specificity won't be embraced.
Wait, I have one question for Kiki. Can I ask it?
Yeah.
Well, can I respond to that real quick? Because I wanted to say too, I think it also goes back to trusting the audience, because everything will like fall into place, and you have to trust that your audience will be on board and suspend that disbelief and be curious and maybe get a little lost, but will hop back in once you have all these moving pieces of these.
Just like they do with Shakespeare.
Hey, thank you. That's what I'm saying. Okay, that's it. What's up, man?
Okay, my question is, when you're preparing curriculum, like, what are some of the ways that you try to make Shakespeare relevant? I just love this question.
Oh, okay. So this is a fun one, and I'll give everyone a little bit of a spoiler. Franco maybe saw this already, but a little bit of a spoiler for the curriculum is we were talking about, because I was like, how do you make this like fun and engaging while we're on Zoom? Because I know a lot of these kids have been on Zoom all day for the last several months, and some are going back and some are still online. So we try to figure out a way to, like, how do we engage them and play? So I try to make it so that they're doing activities with me. But a fun game that we get to play with for this round of the curriculum is it hip hop or is it Shakespeare? So we're really tying in that aspect of, like, these both play with language. These are both things that you may know, you might not know, you might have heard, but really tying it back into everyone plays with language and you like it in this form. So why, maybe you'll like it in this form. Have you considered it this other way? And really opening up that as a dialogue. So that is how I've been trying to, specifically with this round of curriculum.
I love it.
Yeah. It's awesome.
Awesome. Let's see. Does anybody have any other question you would want to ask in this free time? Yes.
I do. Yeah. Okay. So I was wondering, any kind of media that y'all have been consuming that is either Spanglish, bilingual, or just straight up in Spanish or whatever, whether it's a book or a movie, a podcast, a show, anything you could recommend to the audience if they're interested in consuming more bilingual content.
I'll go first just because it's off the top of my head. I have two things. One, Carlos Ella recommended this to me, but there's a new Isabel Allende show on HBO Max that is really beautiful. Very good. It's about her life around when she was exiled from Chile. Second, it's a song, but if you haven't heard it, Yo Perreo Sola featuring Ivy Queen is amazing, and you should listen to that version specifically.
Puerto Rican.
Yes, you should listen to that version specifically because Ivy Queen, like, is essentially the reason why we have modern reggaeton, and she's just an awesome reggaetonera rather than reggaetonero. Those are my two, just like
sick
off the top of my head.
Sick.
Mine is not bilingual, but it's a foreign language show I found in Netflix called It's Okay Not to Be Okay. It's a Korean show. And it is, so you need to read the captions, and I am a very slow reader, so I'm like pausing it and going back every 10 seconds. So it takes me forever to watch an episode, but it's so good for two reasons. A, it is a love story, unapologetically cheesy at times. Like, it marinates on cheesiness, and I'm like, I'm here for it. Yes, the cheesy music and the rain. And second, because it has such beautiful imagination and it has like an originality that's rare to see in TV. The premise of it is that a author of kids' books who happens to be a sociopath is falling in love with a dude who's a caretaker in a psychiatric hospital. So it's like this deeply caring person and this sociopath who writes children literature coming together, and it has this beautiful fairy tale and storybook aesthetic and magic moments to it that's just like really refreshing, and it's giving me life even though it takes me 17 years to watch an episode.
What is it called?
It's Okay Not to Be Okay in Netflix.
Kiki, how about you?
Okay, I watch a lot of anime. I just want to say, like, just an overarching statement that I think everyone should watch anime, and I think you should watch it in both forms of the dubbing of it in English, as well as go back and watch it. I'm a big nerd. As well as go back and watch it again with it in its native language, and then have it the words written out, because it's just an interesting concept, because we've talked about this a couple times, like, things don't always translate perfectly. So it's interesting to see, like, oh, when American Voices recorded this is how this came out translation wise, as opposed to reading what it is translation wise and just reading it and hearing the like cadence and everything that's going on in the story. I think it's just a fascinating way to look at language and see where people like change it up for their own interpretation versus when it's like just written out as a straight translation, what that looks like.
Absolutely. Ana Maria, how about you?
I mean, none of them are new, but one of them is Gentified on Netflix, and I loved it for like many reasons. One of it being like my dad's from Boyle Heights, so like one of them is that, and then also there's a queer story in it, and that's something that it does not happen enough. Is that there's enough like LGBTQ representation in stories around Latinidad. So like also shout out to Maria Franco for always making that part of their work. So thank you. So I love that. I also, as someone, like we were talking about how like we didn't grow up with certain things, like but I don't want to go down and take a history class. I found Drunk History Mexico on Prime, and it is delightful. Like if you are a fan of the Drunk History, like the original Comedy Central Drunk History, it's the exact same concept, but in Mexico. And it is like famous like Mexican comedians telling the story of like different historical events. And then you see all these like Latinx actors acting it out, and it's completely ridiculous and silly. And obviously it's through that lens. So we'll see about the facts. But like now I'm like understanding certain things. There's also like Peru is featured in there. So like it's not just Mexico. So I like that's part of the reason I enjoyed it. So those have been the things that I've done lately. And then otherwise I just always try to read as Me Too or like it's a couple other like online stuff that I'm always reading.
What about you, Franco?
Well, I really like Los Spookies. So good.
Featuring
so good.
Salvadoran head writer and actor.
Okay,
yeah. Julio Torres.
Yeah,
What network is that on?
HBO Max.
Oh, okay.
It's hilarious. It's hilarious.
And it's also about like Latin American goth culture.
It's amazing.
Which is great.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to
hilarious.
interrupt you.
No. It's fine. I know you love it too. Yes. On the subject of drunk history, I'm just here to propose and say that we're Seattle Shakespeare. To ever do a drunk Shakespeare show, I would love to do the drunk Shakespeare of Romeo and Juliet. Just putting it out there, could be the pilot of a great online season. So much fun. This has been so great hanging out with all of you. Thanks, Seattle Shakes, for having us all here to hang out and talk about bilingual work together. It's been great.
Thank you, everybody. George, you have a lot of thinking to do about your drunk history Shakespeare season.
I want to thank all of you so much for inspiring all of us and sharing your thoughts and insights. Things were, we could keep going on for another indeterminate amount of time. Things were just getting juicy and interesting. And the conversation will keep going. And the conversation, we focus a lot on bilingual Shakespeare for today, because that's where we've kind of been focusing on for the last few years. But I really appreciate the panelists bringing up that language is universal, regardless of whether it's your native language or not. And we share, as human beings, the knowledge of language. That is something that is sets us apart in from a lot of the animal kingdom, not all of it. And our language skills.
Dolphins are about to hear you say this.
So language is language, and language is universal, and Shakespeare is universal. And I really thank you all for engaging in this conversation. And there is a lot more to come.
Yay! Woo! I can't wait.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
With that, Arlene, you want to send us off?
No, I think you just did.
Okay. Bye-bye, everyone. Good night. Thank you. God bless. Stay safe. Get vaccinated. Please get vaccinated.